panel on Generation Disrupted, Earning Trust, Finding Meaning, and Building Skills. And it's my great pleasure to invite CBS News anchor Elaine Quijano to the stage to introduce the next session and the panelists. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Set up my water here.
Hello, everyone. How is everyone doing? Ready for this fabulous panel? I'm so thrilled to be here. Welcome to Generation Disrupted, a conversation about what is on the minds of millennials and Gen Zs, who now make up half of the Earth's population. Today, we are, of course, broadcasting live from Reykjavik, Iceland, as part of the 2019 Reykjavik Global Forum Women Leaders. I am Elaine Quijano, correspondent for CBS News and anchor for CBSN, CBS News 24/7 digital channel. I'm moderating this discussion with our fabulous panel, 3 women leaders from diverse backgrounds. Michele Parmelee is the Global Chief People and Purpose Officer at Deloitte. Victoria Budson is the founding executive director of the Women in Public Policy program for the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. And Serena Saunders is a student at the University of Maryland and a member of the running Start Delegation here at the Reykjavik Global Forum. Just some housekeeping. This session is being live streamed on CBSN. That is at cbsnews.com/women leaders. We are delighted to be connecting with a global audience today. Wherever you are in the world, be sure to include the hashtag Reykjavik19 with all of your comments and tweets related to this discussion. So, without further ado, let's get right to the heart of this. Millennials and Gen Zs, together they account for most of the global workforce, and that of course means what they think, what they believe, what they do, what they choose not to do is transforming our society as we know it, creating an urgent need for business, nonprofits, and government to work together to understand their needs and empower them to succeed in a rapidly changing world. So Serena, you and I were talking earlier today about our different sort of paths. I am a Gen Xer, and back in my day, it used to be one could almost take for granted that a certain path existed. You went to college, you got your degree, you knew there would be a job for you somewhere, and that you could go on to make those life decisions, buying a house, getting married, having children, along this set path. Tell me about what it's like for you and your peers. When it comes to the job outlook, for instance, what is it that you are seeing and that your friends are seeing in the world today?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. Thank you so much for asking it. So a bit of a disclaimer, I'm going to graduate college debt-free, which is a blessing, truly. Not everyone can say that, and it's a huge privilege. So I don't have to think about my starting salary for an entry-level job. Most people really do have to think about that when factoring into how they're actually going to pay their student loans back. I'm personally looking for a very inclusive workplace. That's important to me as a cisgender hetero woman. You know, it's very important for me that I can find a place where I can be myself, where I can be a Black woman, where I can feel free to express myself and all of my different identities. That's of critical importance to me. Beyond that, I think we're also looking for good benefits. You know, we really want flexible time because millennials value a wide range of things. One of them is experiences and being able to travel with your friends and family, you know. And some jobs have very strict leave policies, some have less strict. So we're really looking at the whole experience. So while we may be able to find a job, is it a job that's fulfilling for us personally? Is it something that will reward us for being loyal employees? Or will actually give us some flexibility if we don't want to be that loyal anymore? You know, so we're really looking for a whole host of different factors as we're going into the workforce.
So, Michele, that brings me to you. As a business leader, as someone who is part of the driving force behind Deloitte's Millennial Survey research, how does what Serena has just laid out comport with what you actually found in your research?
Yeah, what Serena said is very aligned to to what we found in our research. You know, this generation is more globally connected and just more aware of what's going on in the environment outside of them, and they understand that they have choices and their priorities are different than prior generations, and they have high expectations. And so we as business leaders need to understand what their priorities are and understand that we have something that we must provide to them in terms of providing them meaning in their work. So it's not just about, again, you know, as you said, that the salary that you're making, it's what kind of meaning and purpose is there behind the work. And they want to be associated with an organization that has a purpose greater than making a profit. What we've found is, we've been doing this survey for 8 years, is that the millennials' trust in business has declined rapidly. It used to be 75% of those surveyed thought that business was having a positive impact in society, and now with our most recent survey, that's down to 55%.
Fair to say there's a sense of unease and pessimism about business?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they feel like business's agenda is all about making a profit. And while they understand that businesses must make a profit to survive, they think there are other important, you know, items that should be balanced with that on a business's agenda. So it's around the livelihood of their employees. It's about the impact they're making to society. It's about the positive impact they're having on their climate beyond just kind of this profit priority.
Victoria, I want to turn to you. So Deloitte's survey also found that 45% of millennials said they have no trust in political leaders as sources of reliable and accurate information. Nearly 3/4 said political leaders are failing to have a positive impact on the world. So Victoria, as someone who has worked in the government space and advised policymakers and government officials, what jumps out to you? Are these findings at all surprising to you?
I think it's not surprising given how millennials and Gen Zs feel about most of our social institutions. So along with distrust of government for accurate information, we're seeing incredibly low numbers of trust within the media as well. And a full 25% of millennials literally don't trust anything they see from major media sources. But I think to also blend that into how they see social society as a whole, even faith leaders, 2/3 don't feel a strong sense of trust from leadership in communities of faith. But what we continue to see is that millennials and Gen Z, just as generations before, still look to government to solve problems. So it's really an opportunity. How can leaders not just talk the talk, but follow through on actions which are really in concert with the values-driven way of looking at the world that millennials and Gen Zs have? So I think there's an opportunity to rebuild that trust, but it's only going to come if millennials and Gen Zs begin to hear things from leadership that are then matched by a set of actions that they can follow through and see.
So part of this bigger picture has to do with the changing technological landscape, which at CBSN we know well. Digital is very much our of course, bread and butter. But I wonder, Serena, from your perspective, how does that inform the way in which you think about the potential opportunities that may or may not be there for you, and whether or not you can look at a place and say, this is where I see myself 5 years from now, this is a place where perhaps 10 years from now I could be. Is that something that enters into your thinking at all?
Yeah, I think for myself and for most of my friends and peers, we're really looking for somewhere where we can learn professionally. So professional development is something that's very important for us going into any career path, any entry-level job. And part of that is real hands-on work with technology.
Mm-hmm.
So building hard skills, coding, any of that sort of realm there is all something that we know that we have to kind of gain experience in to be able to go forward in our careers. So for me personally, that means working on learning basic coding skills in classes, learning on the internet using open source platforms, things like that. So I think with technology comes a whole host of new opportunities for learning, but it also creates somewhat of a burden on us, you know, because it's an extra thing that we have to learn to be able to succeed professionally.
So Deloitte's research also found that only about 1 in 5 respondents believe that they have all of those skills that are going to be necessary and the knowledge needed for a world being shaped in this technologically evolving environment. What are some of the ways, Serena, that nonprofits in particular, when you look at that kind of landscape, help to prepare leaders specifically for the future?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. So I've spent most of my undergraduate career interning and working at different nonprofits, so I kind of have a twofold answer to that. So the first way is actually directly preparing leaders for the future. So I'm here with Running Start, which trains young women to run for political office by directly providing those skills. The other side of it is actually advocacy for the next group of young people to enter the workforce. I currently intern at Pay Our Interns, which advocates for paid internships across the board. So both learning those skills from nonprofits that provide them at a low cost, often for free, which is actually fantastic, and also really reaching back and advocating for, let's change the system that requires us to have these skills. Is 2 ways that I see that nonprofits actually working to create those leaders for the future.
So in terms of social progress, 2/3 of millennials believe that because of their backgrounds, some people never get a fair chance to achieve success no matter how hard they study and work. So Victoria, you have seen this landscape evolve as well. Do you think social mobility is possible for most? Are there certain groups that face higher barriers than others?
So social mobility is definitely possible for most, but we are really seeing intrinsic challenges. They're overcomable, but are really still present. For example, and I'll quote some statistics from the United States, when we look at wage gaps, what we see, and I always suggest that you envision where you pay your bills when I walk through this, whether that's at your kitchen table on your computer, whether it's sitting at a desk. But in the United States, Hispanic women make about 62 cents on the dollar compared to white men. Hispanic men, 69 cents. Black women, 67 cents. Black men, 74 cents. White women, 81 cents. But if you imagine trying to live the same type of life, with in some cases just a little over half the income, that puts you in a very different position. Now, drawing this conversation back to the barriers that we see with millennials and Gen Z, for millennials who graduated in 2008, for women, 1 year after graduation, and Serena, let's draw from your comment about being prepared for the STEM economy, science, technology, engineering, and math, women who had the same majors of engineering and information systems, we saw a 12% gap 1 year after graduation. They have the same degree, they have the same years of experience, they have the same knowledge set. They can't inoculate themselves from that gap. So there has to be an awareness and a vigilance, and we're sitting in Iceland, which is a nation which has gone furthest in legislating, pulling it back to government, to ensure that people have equal pay. So what we're finding is even when millennials and Gen Zs prepare themselves for the future in all the right ways, we are seeing this intersectional diminishment of wages, which has led to millennials purchasing homes at a lower rate, having children at a lower rate. Many do graduate with student debt. So we have a very different economic structure for these two generations than we've seen in the past.
So Michele, with those challenges in mind, as a business leader, what are some of the conversations around addressing some of those issues like? From your perspective, it would seem there is increasing awareness of things like the continued wage gap and some of the other things that Victoria outlined. So in practice, what are some of the ways in which you try to address some of these challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key lesson from this research, as you said, is to look at it in terms of opportunity. And there are a lot of opportunities for business. So it's not just about defining a purpose and your shared values, it's putting them into action. So we talked about development of skills. So how can you integrate your purpose into the talent experience? So in terms of skills, are you providing a culture of lifelong learning? Are you providing growth opportunities to your people to position them for leadership opportunities? Are you supporting and rewarding people for contributing to society outside of perhaps their daily work? Are you creating a diverse workforce that has an inclusive culture, which is one of the first things Serena said in terms of being able to bring your true self to the workplace, which is how we know that people perform at their best. And so, and there's just a variety of ways that I think that business can understand the concerns and the desires of these millennial and Gen Z generations and integrate them into their strategy, their priorities, and their actions.
Serena, I want to ask you about the broader picture of having a sense of hope about the future or a lack of hope about the future. When you have conversations with your peers, for instance, around which specific areas do you find sort of get the biggest, most passionate responses, whether it be what Victoria talked about, a lack of faith in institutions, or things like the wage gap? Are there specific areas that are particularly for you and your peer group that you're particularly passionate about?
Yeah, I think echoing what Victoria said, we do have a lack of trust in social institutions, but because of that, we're willing to change them. And that's something that I think we found a lot of passion around, is actually going into the system and changing it for the better. For myself and for a lot of my peers who are in the government public policy space, we're all very interested in going into government and politics because we know how much things can be improved, and we really actually want to get involved so that we can make them better.
What's the source of some of the lack of faith? I'm curious. When you talk about that, and we talk about it in broad terms, are there things that you and your peers point to as sort of evidence of how you've been failed by various institutions?
I would definitely say that the recession is probably the biggest one for us. So I'm 21 now, so I wasn't really a whole person, if you will, when the recession happened, but growing up in the wake of it, going to high school and to university in the wake of it has been extremely detrimental. Just knowing that another recession could happen.
How has that affected you? What has that been like?
It's very stressful, we'll say that. Just knowing that another recession could happen just like that. That if I graduate in a recession year, I won't have a job. Those kinds of things are incredibly stressful in the job search.
And how does that inform the decisions that you make
day
to day?
Yes, so I think I would say I'm a lot more careful about putting my eggs in one basket. I kind of like to expand my network, kind of think about if this goes wrong, what can I do with this? So really like multi-level strategic planning in case anything does happen in that sense.
It's interesting you say that because, again, going back to my own experience, I come from a different generation where I had as my role models, for instance, my father who worked for the same company for nearly 30 years. And in my mind, this is sort of the way it was done.
Yeah.
And what I'm hearing is that it's not at all what you think about when you think about the future.
Yeah, the other thing we found from our research is around loyalty.
Right.
And that millennials are much more willing to get up and pursue the next opportunity, whereas older generations were more career, one organization, career-minded. But they're higher criteria. They want diversity and inclusion and flexible, agile working environments and growth opportunities, or they are willing to get up and go to the next opportunity. So loyalty is definitely different these days.
And one of the things to follow up on this ability to move and shift, not just by career but by sector, and the interest in public policy and how to get it right with our social institutions, we are seeing a huge rise in millennials and Gen Zs and their interest in running for political office. In the last electoral cycle, we saw a rise in participation, and in this electoral cycle for 2019, we have 600 to 700 millennials running for offices across the United States. We have 6% holding legislative seats now. And looking at the federal level, in Congress, in the 2015 Congress, elected in 2016, there was one millennial elected. when we fast forward to the 2018 electoral cycle, not only did we have more millennials, we had 25 elected, which is a huge increase, but they're really vocal. And whether it's AOC or others, Ayanna Pressley, you can see millennials speaking out, talking generationally, being very clear about not just what their particular policies are, but discussing changing fundamental views of what they think government should provide for its citizenry. So we're seeing a very different type of politics.
Can you speak to that a little bit more? Because I'm curious, what is it that they find most motivates them? Are there one or two political issues? Is it climate change? Is it, or is it more structural that they are looking to really kind of get into the infrastructure itself of government in a way that they feel they can then go ahead and affect change?
I think we see a number of different things. So first, environment lists and climate change is the top issue of concern, followed interestingly by social mobility. Yeah. So this real sense of, are things fair? For many generations, there would be the comment, who said life was going to be fair? Millennials and Gen Zs say we do. And they expect their businesses, their societal frames to demonstrate that and to walk the talk and to fully prove to them. There's also an expectation that will prove it to them that they will provide an opportunity, or, as Michele said, they'll walk. They will look for an organization where they feel that their skills can be greater valued. And I think that the second piece is that they grew up in a time period where they didn't hear news from a local arena and then one set of national news. They grow up living in a global community. Tragedies which happen with geographic distance are no longer considered geographically far. They're considered part of their landscape. So I think they have a tremendous amount more negative events coming in and feel, as we just heard from the most beautiful singing of the guitarist who just played, with such a powerful message, they feel empowered to act, make change, and participate. And they're not waiting.
Serena, Victoria mentions this idea of expectation of institutions like business, for instance. What does that look like for you and your peers? When you talk about having a viewpoint on a business, for instance, that is sort of socially conscious, how does that manifest itself in your mind?
Yeah.
What is it that you'd like to see?
Yeah, I'll specifically give the example of Patagonia, which does really amazing environmental work. Their entire brand publicly is built around environmentalism and sustainability. That's like the core of who they are as a company. And I know people who have worked at Patagonia who have said that that reflects in everything that they do. They actually walk the walk, if you will, rather than just talking the talk. So that's one example. So I think with different companies and different businesses, it's different, but really focusing on even one aspect of the values that millennials and Gen Z really care about, whether that's environmentalism, whether that's progressivism in general, or flexibility, any of the things that both of you have kind of talked about. Building their brand around that and then actually doing it internally as well is something that millennials and Gen Z are really, really interested in.
And Michele, then, how is what Serena just laid out changing the conversation in boardrooms globally? Is there a sense that there is a sense of discontent among millennials and Gen Zs who are looking for a more specific kind of mission statement as opposed to just a business goal?
Yeah, absolutely. They say if purpose is owned by brand or marketing versus integrated into your business and your products and your services, then you're not thinking the right way. But I think it's actually been a very wonderful challenge for business leaders to understand the interests of millennials. First of all, I think we're listening more to them and understanding. You hear a lot of companies having a millennial board or a millennial committee, if you will, that reports up either to executive and or boards to bring that perspective in decision making. But it's also a really good challenge that we need to step up and not just, again, talk, but actually take action and take more of a vocal stand, which for some business leaders can cause some discomfort, but take more of a stand on the issues that matter so that our people know where we stand. And another piece of the survey that we didn't dive into yet is that millennials are looking at businesses and who they're buying their products and services from. And if they don't see those businesses as being aligned to purpose, they would walk. If they are not aligned to the ethics of a business's leadership, again, they will no longer want to be a customer. So I think businesses are appreciating that, listening better, and taking more meaningful action in that direction.
Do you want to weigh in,
And
Victoria?
building off that, I think that the key for both courting and retaining through the hiring, promotion, and retention cycle for millennials and Gen Z is understanding that this isn't an initiative which is siloed, but really looking at broad organizational shift. And as we're focused on gender equity, the core of how that can be accomplished is through these organizational shifts, where it is a through line and enacted in every business process, where the values are lived day to day. And I think there's extraordinary opportunity of millennials and Gen Z, the ever more global and diverse communities in business and government, in the nonprofit sector, for us to use what is really the catalyzing that your generation has done of holding people's feet to the fire and holding us accountable to make sure that we get it right, and to use evidence-based tools and interventions, not just to look at best practice, but really to look at research, so we have metrics and we can measure and assess how are we doing, and not just in the bean counting for how many people who look a certain way, but what is our diversity of thought? What is our diversity of background? What is our diversity of genders? And how are we fundamentally integrating people into our workplace so that we can see a much better understanding of what the products are going to need to be for the future? In the US, by 2040, every major city will be majority minority, and the largest purchasing power will be Hispanic women. So if you don't have the largest group in the workforce engaged in the intersectionality accounted for, your businesses and your governments are going to suffer.
And if I can, to bring along both those points and technology, millennials love holding people accountable. It's kind of our bread and butter. I don't know if you guys have noticed.
They do?
Yeah,
Okay.
we really do. So if your external brand is not aligned with your internal practices, we will find out and we will call you out. It's a central feature of sort of how millennials think about the world, is that we actually have the power to do that now. With Twitter, with Facebook, with everything that we have, we can do that. We love doing it. We don't want to do it, but we will if business and government and nonprofits aren't aligned with who they say they are. But yeah, I think that's really important to really recognize that millennials really do care about, having people actually learning from all those experiences that both of you talked about, from data, from research, from actually learning from best practices, and really expanding upon that and then actually doing it. That's what we love to see. That's #1 priority for most of us.
This has been such a wonderful discussion. In our final minutes, I want to give everyone the opportunity up here to give some closing thoughts. Serena, I'll start with you.
Sure. I think for a major takeaway from a millennial Gen Z cusper is definitely to talk to us. We have plenty of opinions. We love sharing them. And something that the millennial survey really does is, actually ask us, what do you want to see? That's something that not a lot of companies and corporations and government and nonprofits do. So ask us what we want to see, and then actually do it.
My closing thoughts are encouraging millennials and Gen Zs within your communities and all of your affinity groups and circles. Encourage them to get involved and engaged in government at the community level, at the provincial or state level, at the federal level. But we really need an integrated society where things are woven back together in so many ways that they're fractured, and engaging people to run and get involved. If you're a millennial and you're listening, I ask you to run for office. Don't wait till you think you know more. You know plenty right now. We need your wisdom. Don't wait.
I would say continue to hold us accountable as millennials. Force us to have greater transparency and greater accountability, and at the same time, collaborate with us. We need to solve all of these challenges that we've talked about, that the survey speaks to, together. Business, government, NGOs, across generations. It's going to take all of us, so we need to collaborate.
Thank you all so much for viewing today's session and live stream. Wherever you are in the world, I hope this has given you some new perspective on millennials and Gen Zs. I want to thank our panelists so much. Thank you all again for listening.